was around midnight when I finally turned off the lights and climbed into bed. The dorm was quiet. Most students were either out or asleep. As I settled under the covers, the hum of the building's ventilation system became a comforting background noise, lulling me towards sleep. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway. At first, I thought it was just one of my neighbors heading to the bathroom or returning late from a night out. But the footsteps stopped right outside my door and lingered. My heart started to race. The door's peephole offered a narrow view of the dimly lit corridor, but I didn't dare get up to look. Instead, I lay there, listening intently. The sound of shuffling feet continued, accompanied by a faint, almost inaudible whisper. It sent a shiver down my spine. Who could possibly be out there at this hour? And why were they standing outside my door? I reached for my phone, my hands trembling, and turned off the screen light to avoid giving away my presence. Then the doorknob rattled softly. My breath caught in my throat as I realized someone was trying to get in. The door was locked, but that small barrier felt woefully inadequate. I felt trapped, frozen in place, unsure of what to do. The intruder's whispers grew clearer. They were muttering something under their breath, something that sounded like a list of names. My blood ran cold when I heard my own name mentioned, along with details about my daily routine. How did they know so much about me? About all of us? Panicking, I quietly got out of bed and grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a metal desk lamp. I positioned myself near the door, ready to defend myself if it came to that. My mind raced through my options. Should I call the police? But what if the intruder heard me? Then I remembered the emergency call box installed in the hallway, just a few doors down. If I could somehow distract the intruder, I might have a chance to make a run for it. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. My eyes darted around the room, landing on a stack of textbooks. An idea formed. I quietly piled the books near the door and gently pushed them over, causing a loud thud. The noise startled the intruder, who stopped fiddling with the doorknob. "Who's there?" they called out, their voice low and tense. I stayed silent, holding my breath. After a moment of hesitation, I heard the footsteps retreating down the hall. This was my chance. I slipped out of the room, leaving the door ajar to avoid making noise. My bare feet were silent against the cold floor as I crept toward the emergency call box. I could still hear the intruder moving down the corridor, their footsteps echoing off the walls. Reaching the call box, I quickly pressed the button and spoke in a whisper, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's someone in the building," I said, giving my location. The response was immediate. The security officer assured me they were on their way. Just as I was about to retreat to my room, I heard a voice, calm, almost casual. "You really shouldn't have done that," it said, sending a jolt of fear through me. The intruder was standing in the shadows, their face obscured, but I could feel their gaze on me. Before I could react, the blare of a security alarm filled the building. Red lights flashed, signaling that help was on the way. The intruder turned and ran, disappearing down the stairwell at the end of the hall. I stood there, trembling, as the realization of what had just happened sank in. The police arrived shortly after and began searching the building. As I stood outside with a blanket wrapped around me, trying to stay warm, a police officer approached. He handed me a small, folded piece of paper. "We found this slipped under your door," he said, his expression serious. My hands shook as I unfolded the note. Scrawled in messy handwriting was a single sentence, "I'm watching you." I looked up, scanning the crowd of concerned students and police officers. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the intruder could be anyone, still out there watching, waiting. The police continued their investigation, but I knew this was far from over. It all started innocently enough. I had just returned to my dorm after attending a campus event where I met a lot of new people. It was one of those casual mixers, and I remember chatting with a few friendly faces, exchanging pleasantries and introductions. Nothing out of the ordinary. Or so I thought. A few days later, I noticed a strange note slipped under my dorm room door. It was a simple piece of paper with a typed message: "You look great at the event." There was no name, just the anonymous compliment. I brushed it off as a weird attempt at flirting and tossed it in the trash. But then, the notes kept coming. Each one was a little more personal, referencing things I had mentioned in passing or activities I had done around campus. The messages ranged from compliments to more unsettling comments about my daily routine, like, "You really enjoy your morning coffee, don't you?" Or, "That red sweater's your favorite, isn't it?" I started feeling paranoid. I began to notice subtle things, a shadow lingering in my peripheral vision, the feeling of being watched as I walked to class, and the unnerving sensation that someone was always nearby. The messages escalated, becoming more direct and invasive. One read: "I see you got a new book. I bet it's a good read." My anxiety grew. I changed my habits, trying to shake the feeling of eyes constantly on me. I started taking different routes to class, avoiding my usual spots on campus, and even switched my morning coffee place. But the notes kept coming, always knowing where I'd been and what I'd done. One night I received a particularly chilling message: "You looked scared today." Why so nervous? That was the breaking point. I felt exposed and vulnerable, trapped in my own life. I knew I had to figure out who was behind this and put an end to it. I confided in my roommate and a few close friends who helped me keep an eye out for anything suspicious. We notified campus security, but without any concrete evidence or knowledge of who was behind the notes, there wasn't much they could do. Still, they promised to increase patrols around the dorm. Determined to catch the stalker, I devised a plan. I intentionally changed my routine again and waited to see if the notes would follow. Sure enough, the next note was waiting for me. "Nice change of plans today." It confirmed my fears. They were watching me closely, adapting to my every move. The turning point came one evening when I noticed a figure lingering near my dorm. They were dressed inconspicuously, but something about their posture and the way they hovered made my skin crawl. My heart raced as I pulled out my phone and discreetly snapped a photo. I didn't recognize them, but I finally had a lead. I handed the photo over to campus security, who took it seriously and began their investigation. Meanwhile, I took extra precautions, locking my doors, staying in groups, and constantly being aware of my surroundings. It was a nerve-wracking time, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. A week later, campus security called me in. They had identified the person in the photo, a student who had attended the same event I did. They had a history of obsessive behavior and had been previously warned for similar incidents. Thankfully, with this evidence, the university took immediate action, banning them from campus and notifying the authorities. Relieved, I thought the ordeal was over. But then, as I packed up to leave the security office, an officer handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a printed photo of me, taken from a distance, with a note: "You're never alone." The officer looked as disturbed as I felt and assured me they would investigate further. As I walked back to my dorm, the feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance. I glanced around nervously, searching for any familiar faces in the crowd. The realization hit me: someone else was still out there, someone who knew too much about my life. I reached my dorm room and fumbled with the key, my hands shaking. As I stepped inside and locked the door behind me, I noticed a small envelope on my desk. With a sinking feeling, I opened it. Inside was a single familiar phrase: "You can never hide." It was the start of my sophomore year. and I was thrilled to be moving into a new dorm. The building was old, with creaky floors and ancient fixtures, but it had character. My room was on the top floor, tucked away in a quiet corner. It felt cozy, a perfect place to focus on my studies. Everything was normal at first. I spent the first few weeks settling in, making friends, and getting used to the rhythm of college life. But then, things started to happen. It was little things at first. Small objects like pens and books would go missing, only to reappear in strange places. I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness. One night I was working late on a paper, my desk lamp the only light in the room. Around midnight I heard a faint knocking sound. I paused, listening carefully. It was coming from the wall behind my bed. It was steady, rhythmic, like someone gently tapping their knuckles. I dismissed it as old pipes, or maybe the wind. As the days went by, the knocking continued. It became more persistent, almost demanding. It was always the same, 3 slow knocks, a pause, and then 3 more. It started to happen at odd hours, waking me up in the middle of the night. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible to sleep through. I asked my neighbors if they heard anything, but they all said no. Then things got stranger. I would come back from class to find my room freezing cold, even though the weather was still warm. The window would be open, despite me always closing it before I left. The air would feel heavy, almost suffocating. It was then that I started to feel like I was being watched. One night, as I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, I felt a sudden pressure on my chest. It was like a heavy weight pinning me down. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Panic surged through me as I struggled to sit up, but something held me in place. The room was dark, but I could sense a presence, something malevolent. Just as suddenly as it started, the pressure lifted, and I gasped for air. Terrified, I spent the next few nights sleeping at a friend's place. I told them about what had happened, but they laughed it off, saying I was just stressed. Reluctantly, I returned to my room, determined to prove to myself that it was all in my head. The final straw came a week later. I was sitting at my desk, working on an assignment, when I felt the temperature drop suddenly. The familiar knocking started, louder than before. I turned to look at the wall, and that's when I saw it, a faint outline of a figure, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall, with indistinct features, but I could make out a pair of eyes staring directly at me. Frozen in fear, I watched as the figure slowly moved closer. The knocking intensified, echoing through the room. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the apparition. Suddenly, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The figure vanished, but the knocking continued, louder and more insistent. I ran to the door, flinging it open and bolting down the hall. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath. I never went back to that room alone. I moved out the next day, telling the housing office that I couldn't concentrate on my studies with all the noises in the old building. They gave me a knowing look, but didn't press for details. Later, I learned from another student that there had been a tragedy in that room years ago. A student who had lived there had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Since then, residents reported strange occurrences, but nothing was ever officially acknowledged. I never got the full story, and I never wanted to. All I know is that something was in that room with me, something angry and restless, and I'll never forget the cold eyes watching me in the dark.